Welcome back, everybody, to the story of separation and to the new story that we can see over the horizon, lighting up the sky like a dawn. This feeling of hope that I mentioned last time, that will not go away and that is not a delusion. The story of separation, as the extreme of yin gives birth to yang, the story of separation as it reaches its culmination gives birth to a new story. A story of interconnection, interdependency, interbeing, but we're not there yet. It has yet to play itself out. So I'm going to say a little bit more about the story of separation and what it has brought to the world. And I'm not going to go fully into all the details, but I'll just mention a couple more aspects of it. One of them is the economic story, the story that we call money. Money, after all, being nothing but a system of agreements, a system of narratives, a system of meanings. These symbols, in and of themselves, bear no power. Their power only comes from the power we invest in them. Otherwise, your bank account would be nothing but a series of zeros and ones. I mean, that's all it really is. Or your $100 bill would be nothing but a piece of paper. But our collective stories and the meanings we invest in these symbols make them so powerful. I mean, this was one of the diagnoses that I was offered. Like, what's the problem in the world? What's the origin of the wrongness? Well, it's obviously money, right? But money, the story that I call money that we call money, is embedded in the story of separation. And it exemplifies many of its aspects, such as the way that it puts us into competition with each other, the way that it generates scarcity as a result of the way that it is created as interest-bearing debt. And I don't know, maybe I'll go more into economics and money and debt later on in our conversation. But right now, I just want to point out how it is consistent with all of the other expressions of separation. It destroys community. It turns us into market adversaries. It exemplifies more for you is less for me. If you get fired, then I get the promotion, that kind of thing. And everybody in an economic interaction is trying to get the best deal. You're trying to get the best deal. You're trying to get the best deal. And I'm trying to get the best deal. And, I'll mention one more thing, which is related to my next little piece, is that money as we know it, I mean, we could make a new story of money. It's emerging. But money as we know it is an engine of endless growth. The growth of the realm of property, the growth of the market, the conversion of nature into products, the conversion of relationships into services. The conversion of nature into products, that leads me to want to say about one more aspect of separation, human separation from nature. And fundamentally, if we see ourselves as separate from the rest of life, separate from the forces of nature, if we understand that beingness is only in human beings and nature itself, it's just a bunch of random forces, generic particles, protons, neutrons, and electrons bouncing around according to the laws of physics. They don't have any agency or intelligence or consciousness in the story of separation. It's just a bunch of stuff out there. And therefore, human progress means progressively asserting our control over the nature that is outside of ourselves, harnessing the natural forces, insulating ourselves from all of the bad things, dominating the predators, the bugs, the germs, the pests, the weeds. That is where progress comes. That's where our well-being comes, because we're separate from the rest of life, and so our benefit might be their loss. This mind form goes back thousands of years, and it is the origin of the concept of good and evil. The kings in the ancient sagas, the Sumerian legends and myths, they were the heroes who imposed order on the wild, who domesticated the beasts, who cut down the forests. That's even mentioned in the Epic of Gilgamesh, deforestation, who drained the wetlands, who killed the wolves. This is where evil came from. The wolf is evil, the sheep is good. The wild is evil, the ordered domestic realm is good. This was human progress. This basic template of overcoming evil and asserting dominance has infiltrated every aspect of our political culture. It's the basic problem-solving template of our society. If there is a problem, find the bad guy. Defeat the bad guy, and the problem is solved. This is the basic mentality of war. And what I'm saying is that the mentality of war rests on a deeper place, rests on the story of separation. The basic mentality of war is a formula to solve any problem. The problem, of course, as the saying goes, if you have a hammer, then everything looks like a nail. If our go-to solution is to find the bad guy, find the enemy, and defeat them by force, then we become blind to any other way of solving problems. And you can totally see this in political culture right now, where if we could only defeat, I mean, there's an election happening as we make this course. As I'm having this conversation, like, this is coming into people's minds, that if we could only, and I don't want to well, probably you can guess what politicians I like and what I don't, but let's just say, if you think that, I mean, you're looking at the world, looking at our society, looking at the direction things are going, and you want to find someone to blame. Okay, maybe it is Donald Trump, or maybe it is the Clintons and their nefarious foundation, or maybe it is the deep state, or maybe it is the establishment, or maybe it is just this candidate who doesn't get it, but my candidate does. And if we could only get the right person in office, then all of our problems would be solved, or at least that would be a step towards solving our problems. This mindset comes naturally to us because it's the same mindset as if you get sick, find the germ, kill the germ. If there is terrorism happening, find the terrorist, kill the terrorist. Crime, arrest the criminals and lock them up. Problem solved. Your agricultural output is declining. Well, find the weeds and come up with a new herbicide to destroy the weeds. Problem solved. Or what if you are overweight and you're eating too much? What's the bad thing in you that you can overcome with some kind of psychological force, some kind of willpower, and problem solved? It's a ubiquitous mindset. And ironically, that mindset prevents us from solving any of our problems. Yeah, so let's take a few political issues that are coming up, that have been around for a long time, like say healthcare. Healthcare, actually nobody knows what to do about it. And that is really uncomfortable. Not knowing what to do about something is really uncomfortable. So let's make it into something we do know how to do something about. What do we know how to do? We know how to attack, take down, defeat, and destroy somebody. So we need to find a bad guy. Maybe it's the greedy insurance companies. Maybe it's the greedy pharmaceutical companies. Somebody that we can put in the role of enemy, in the role of evil. Then we know what to do. Think about any issue and how to solve it. Starting with the issue of who gets to govern. I mean, our political system is set up that way. It's set up as a battle. Elections are framed as a battle or as a competition, and they are a competition. I mean, this isn't something that we're just inventing and projecting onto the world. It's systematized. What I'm talking about is not merely changing our beliefs about the world, because the beliefs, the beliefs generate the system, but the system also generates the beliefs. If you are immersed in a money economy, the world is sure going to seem like a war of each against all. It's sure going to seem that people don't really care about you and that everybody's out for their own gain. It's going to look like human nature. And the same thing is true when we're immersed in the current kind of electoral system. This points to how deeply the change has to go for us ever to have a world significantly different than the one we have right now. How do we do that? Wouldn't you like an answer? Wouldn't you like me to tell you, here's how we can change everything? If I could give you that answer, I would be part of the problem. Before we get to that answer, we have to rest in and embrace not knowing, to embrace the bewilderment. When we see actually the scope of the situation, when we apprehend the impossibility of changing something by finding the bad guy and destroying them, and we don't know what to do, then there's a chance for new knowledge to come in. Now, I'm not saying don't support one candidate over another, but understand that by deploying the tactics of war, you are strengthening the overall mentality of war. I read a number of left-wing and right-wing websites, and in a way, they're all the same. Both of them say, here's the problem, especially if you read the comments sections, but also it's in the headlines too. Here's the problem. It's those horrible people on the other side. It's those ignorant people, those stupid people, those immoral people on the other side. Look at the abortion debate, for example. Both sides have essentially the same diagnosis of the problem. It's those misogynistic, paternalistic, dominating men and the women who knuckle under to them on the other side, who don't respect a woman's freedom of choice, who want to impose their will upon our bodies. That's one side. And on the other side, it's those selfish, thoughtless, immoral women who would would sacrifice the life of a human soul just for their own convenience. How could they? Both sides have this. How could they? It's the same diagnosis. There are these irredeemable, horrible people on the other side, and along with them, their followers, their dupes, the people who ignorantly and blindly follow their evil prescriptions. Both sides have the same diagnosis. The same diagnosis, evil. What would it be like to let go of that diagnosis? Maybe both sides are wrong. And you can extend this to any debate. The climate debate, it's another one. The problem is the climate deniers, those fossil fuel industry sponsored pseudoscientists who would sacrifice the future of the whole planet for their narrow, temporary self-interest. How could they? And the corrupt politicians that they influence, and those wicked fossil fuel oil company executives and their greedy shareholders. Or maybe it's those liberal greenies and enviros who are using the excuse of climate change to implement socialist one-world government. Whatever side of this debate you're on, you probably don't even understand what the other side is saying. Do you know? I'm assuming probably most people listening to this believe in climate change and are on the liberal side of the spectrum, but I don't know. It's getting confusing these days. Who's liberal and who's conservative? Anyway, you might not even know what the narrative is on the other side, because part of the tactics of war is to caricaturize and dehumanize the other side. It is almost an act of betrayal to take them at face value, to really seek to understand the other side. It's kind of to extend them any kind of empathy, to ask, what is it? Where are they really coming from? Because that rehumanizes them. that pierces the diagnosis of evil. To even ask, well, what is it like for them? What is their world like? What is it like to be them? That already is an act of peace. To seek to understand the enemy is, in the eyes of the partisan, an act of betrayal, because it doesn't serve the narrative. Part of war making is to propagate a narrative that the other side is evil and we're good. So that's why in the Iraq war, you had these propaganda stories, there's no other way to call them, propaganda stories circulating about Iraqi soldiers ripping babies out of incubators, and throwing them on the street. Like, that was never true. I mean, this goes back to World War I. I mean, those kinds of stories were circulating in World War I, the atrocity stories, and probably way, way farther back than that. In order to fight somebody, in order to seek to kill them, you have to dehumanize them first. In order to exploit somebody, you have to dehumanize them first. People think that slavery was a result of racism, but it was actually the other way around. Racism is a result of slavery because in order to make slavery acceptable, you have to reduce the slave to something less than human. And you can see the same thing happening even, in a personal realm, in the relational realm with warring couples. They were in love, but now they're going through a divorce, and each side reaches out for their allies to buttress the narrative of, isn't that other person awful? Aren't they awful? Therefore, any means is justified to win the battle because they're evil and we're good. As long as our political culture is stuck in that, as long as we refuse to let the truth in or any inconvenient truth in because the narrative itself is a weapon, the narrative that they are evil is a weapon. Anything that disrupts that does not serve our side, does it? Even if it's true. As long as that happens, we are never going to have coherence in the body politic. And we need coherence right now. This is the biggest problem facing the world. It's not climate change. It's not ecological disintegration. It's not the economic crisis. It's not even the threat of nuclear war. None of these is the biggest problem today. The biggest problem is polarization. It is war mentality. Because our situation as a civilization, it's like a ship that is caught in a whirlpool, caught in like this giant whirlpool in the ocean, and it's swirling, 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 and getting sucked down. And if everybody on deck took the oars and started pulling in unison on the oars, we could get out. But they're not. It's like everyone on deck is in a brawl, fighting each other. And if that happens, we're just going to continue to go down to the bottom of the ocean. If nothing changes, if we don't all get together and row toward a different destination that is toward a common vision, that we're unified around, we're not going to get anywhere except where we've been going. Our inertia will carry us into not a very good place. So I'd like to offer you an invitation, or, a lens to look at politics today, to look at public discourse today. And the lens is just to notice the tactics of war, the tactics of dehumanization, and to try on a different lens, to try on the lens of, what is it like to be you? Where is the other side coming from? What is their story about the world? What do they take as fact? What do they care about? How do they narrate events to each other? By doing that, you become a peacemaker, potentially. You become an agent of peace. And you'll notice that there's a sacrifice that needs to happen, because it kind of feels good to be on team good fighting team evil because you know who you are now. You're worthy, you're right. If you're sourcing any kind of self-esteem, any kind of personal validation from being good and right, then are you really going to have the humility to accept any data point that violates the story that you're right and you're good and you're on the good team? You're not going to be likely to let that disrupting information in. Same with the other side. And that's why no amount of logic and evidence is going to convince anybody to change their mind when they're identified with an existing position. That is the holding pattern that we are locked in politically. There's no room for the truth to come in. There's no room for any data point, any information to come in that doesn't fit the weaponized narrative that is being deployed against the other side. There needs to be a willingness to let go of that. And that doesn't mean that the truth lies in between the two sides and it's about compromise. Here's one pole, here's the other pole, and they must meet in the middle. Actually, what it means is that here's one pole, here's the other pole, here's the ferocious debate, and the realization, the solution, the resolution lies underneath the entire debate. It lies in something that's not even part of the conversation. It lies in the questions that are not being asked. Everybody has a different answer to the question, but we need to change the question. Everybody already knows this in a way, that politics is this spectacle, this distraction, this circus. Yeah. Here's a rather extreme metaphor. Imagine that we're all locked in a concentration camp, a death camp. And all of a sudden, the authorities of the death camp offer us an election for camp mascot. And there's two choices for camp mascot. And one of them you think is a really fine person and really deserves this honor and has some really good ideas. And the other one you think is, you don't like that other person. And so you're really a partisan for your candidate for camp mascot. And other people are partisan for the other candidate. And everybody is ferociously debating which candidate is better. And meanwhile, then there's somebody who's like, hey, but guys, this is just the mascot for the death camp. Doesn't matter compared to the issue of we're getting herded into ovens every day and incinerated. Like, it doesn't matter who is the camp mascot. This is a distraction that directs all of our political energy towards something that does not actually change anything. Let me give an example of the way in a certain issue that the debate distracts from any actual progress. Immigration, hot button topic. One side saying, we got to protect our borders, we got to keep these people out, a lot of them are criminals, they're taking away American jobs, et cetera, et cetera. And not just American, I mean, this is an issue in many, many countries. So one side is like, keep them out. And the other side is, America was built for immigrants. These are people fleeing poverty and injustice. We should welcome them in. We should be inclusive and welcoming. And the other side, these are xenophobes and racists and bigots. And then maybe the other side says, we're not xenophobes and bigots. It's you guys who are sacrificing our culture and our way of life, not upholding the rule of law, et cetera, right? There's this debate about immigration. What is not being asked in this debate? Well, for one thing, why are so many people wanting to immigrate to the United States and Western Europe to begin with? Why are conditions so bad in, say, Honduras, in Guatemala, in Mexico, to some extent? Why are they so, what's life like there that somebody would leave their family to go to a very uncertain future, maybe even to pay human traffickers, to pay smugglers, to smuggle them into the United States with no guarantee that they'll even make it, and with a very real possibility that they'll get kidnapped or something like that? to eke out a meager existence there, to send a little bit of money back home and not see their kids. A lot of them don't get to see their kids for years, decades even, leaving the kids with the grandparents. What would it take for you to do that? To leave your home, to leave your family? What would it take? Is either side asking that? Why? Why are so many people wanting to leave? Well, okay, it's because it's an uncomfortable question to ask. Because when you ask that, two things happen. One, you don't know what to do. Because the reason that conditions are so bad in, say, Honduras or Guatemala, it's because of a decades-long history of military imperialism, the funding of death squads, the support of right-wing juntas. It's because of neoliberal austerity programs that strip wealth away from the global south and funnel it into the hands of Western corporations and banks. It's because of, on a deeper level, it's because of the operation of the story of separation that generates our economic and political and military systems. The cause of this is everything. Or at least we could say the cause goes a lot deeper than the political debate as currently formulated can access. So that's the first thing that happens, is that we don't know what to do. The problem no longer fits into the familiar diagnosis of there's some bad people and we've got to keep them out. We got to do something, here's the enemy. It doesn't fit into that anymore. The second uncomfortable thing, beyond not knowing what to do, is that the problem involves ourselves. Because we're part of the system that military imperialism and neoliberal economics upholds. I hope the term neoliberal economics is familiar to you. It's one of those terms that people use a lot without necessarily really knowing what it means. But it's basically the regime of opening markets, allowing to create conditions where a country can join global markets and export its resources and make its labor available to transnational capital. And that's the prescription for development, for prosperity. But usually what happens is that the prosperity is exported onto the United States and the other dominant economies of the world. Anyway, long story, just saying that when you really study the issue, you realize that, yeah, I'm part of the problem too. And this is universal. Anytime that you identify somebody else as evil, you're looking at a mirror, and isn't there that sneaking suspicion in the war of good on evil that maybe there's some evil in me too? Maybe my fervent identification with being on team good is a way to cover up my deep fear that maybe I'm not a good person, but let me prove that I am. So it is coming from a wound. This is one way to understand the cleavage of our society into opposing poles. It comes from a wound of self-rejection. In compensation for that wound, many of us endlessly seek to demonstrate our worthiness and our virtue and our superiority over others, but it comes from an inferiority complex. And what is the origin of that? What is the origin of this wound of separation, this wound of self-rejection? I'm not going to answer that right now. It would be premature to answer that. But I would like to invite you to feel that, the presence of that. The doubt that maybe I'm not one of the good, one of the right, you can see that our political landscape is a mirror of our psychic landscape. You can see that each dimension of healing reflects all the other dimensions of healing. You can see the relatedness of personal healing, relational healing, social healing, political healing, and ecological healing, like a holograph. Each part is a map of the whole. And we can understand, therefore, that we are really all in this together. That what we judge others for, what we project onto others, is a signal of something that needs to be healed within ourselves. And in that understanding, how can we hold a certain group of people as the problem? How can we really believe that by destroying them, we're going to cleanse the world through the war to end all wars? We tried that already. It was called the Great War, 1914 to 1918. The Great War. The war to end all wars. It was called that. They stopped calling it that once the Second World War rolled around. They renamed it as the First World War. We've tried this already. It's time for a different solution, a different approach to the problems on Earth. To do that, maybe we need to take a step back from our habits that operate automatically when we are not aware of them. What I'm hoping to do right now is to bring a little awareness to these unconscious or semi-conscious habits. To offer the possibility of no longer participating in the mentality of war, no longer contributing to the field of war, like this psychic field. When you go online, when you comment on something on Facebook, be aware, am I contributing to the "aren't they awful" meme? They should be ashamed of themselves. They're reprehensible. I condemn. Join me in condemnation. All of this. These are tactics of war. I'm not saying that there's never a time to fight somebody. But when we see everything in terms of a fight, when our go-to default diagnosis is there's some bad person out there, and that's why they're doing bad things, then there's no alternative but a fight. No other possibility is open to us. When we let in the complexity, when we entertain the possibility that what we judge in the world is something in ourselves that we participate in, then the solution of the fight is no longer the most natural solution, and we can become creative. Isn't this creativity what we really need right now? Isn't this the gateway to ending the fight on the deck of the swirling ship, of coming together in coherency to say, how do you see things? That is an offering of peace, to ask, what is your story of the world? Because by asking that question, you are no longer seeing that person as an enemy. That's the first step toward unison. That's the first step toward coherency. That's the first step toward solidarity. Solidarity. All of the conquest on this earth that has happened has been through divide and conquer. When Cortez conquered Mexico in the 16th century, he had an army of like 300 people, but he enlisted all the enemies of the Aztecs into his army. That's how the conquest happened. when the Narragansett rebelled against the English in King Philip's War in the 17th century. They were defeated because other tribes who had been their traditional enemies aided the settlers. This is always how it is. The reason that humanity has not risen to the estate that we can sense as possible, the abundance, the peace, the beautiful world that we know that we could live in, that we glimpse sometimes, the reason that we haven't ascended to that is because we're fighting each other all the time. That's where 99% of our energy is going, to fighting each other. And that fight is inevitable when we diagnose problems as being caused by evil people, when we are always searching for the enemy to erect and war against. The fight is inevitable. It is a product of our way of seeing the world. It is sourced in ultimately the story of separation that holds the world as an other, that fills it with competing separate selves. And that is the story that we are so ready to change. Not just as in our philosophy, but ready to change in our relationships, in our interactions, including, especially, in the political realm. So let's start doing that. Let's start by even seeing others in a different way, by noticing things we haven't noticed before, and by asking the questions that don't fit onto the spectrum. Like, what is the engine of immigration, or of crime, or of abortion, or of the love of guns? To inquire in the spirit not of confirming that I'm right after all, but with an openness, not needing to validate yourself as being good and right. And how do you do that? The question, how do I let go of this? It's not a how-to. It is to give attention to your desire to do this already. To the feeling that I'm done with this. I'm done with the fight. And maybe I don't know how to get out of it, but I feel done with it. I'm ready for peace. I'm ready for unconditional love. I'm ready not to see people as horrible or certain people as horrible. And so to give attention to this readiness and then to begin to see it in other people. Because when you see it, you can speak to it. When you can speak to it, you can call it into manifestation. But to even see it, you have to look for it. You have to believe it exists. And to believe it exists, you have to feel it in yourself. And that's why right now I'm calling your attention to this part of you that is so done with the fight, with the conditional self-approval, and so ready for love, a revolution of love.